Hey everybody, welcome back to the Stop and Listen podcast where the no shits are given and it is always beer 30. Tonight's episode 10, we're going to talk about the missing submersible, and I'm not trying to beat a dead horse because I know almost everyone's talking about it right now, but I do have a few comments on the matter. But before we jump into that, I want to make a couple of announcements. We are officially on Spotify. That way, if you're on the go and you want to listen to us while you're going on the road or whatever, we have that option now, so we are there. And funny little story. I try to tell little stories in these podcasts, especially since we're going to be talking more of a serious matter, but try to start lighthearted. So a coworker of mine, he older gentleman, real nice guy, but he has his wording sometimes when he says stuff, he doesn't think about the way it comes out. And as I mentioned before, I'm a truck driver by day trade, and this guy, he had given me a call, and he said he was on his last load of the day, and he said, "Hey, I had a little trouble at the landfill today." And I said, "Okay, what happened?" He said, "I just left there," but he said, I went to go take, and it's hard to say this with a straight face, that's why I was laughing, but he said, I was able to take half of a dump, and it got stuck, but they were able to get it out of the hole, and I got the rest of the dump out. And the reason why, obviously that sounds funny, but it was entertaining to me. In fact, I couldn't keep a straight face with the guy. He was trying to figure out why I thought it was funny, but of course, to me it was funny because we run dump trucks, so obviously I was like, you got half a dump stuck in your hole. I'm confused what's going on. What are we doing today? So anyway, I was just trying to be funny and a little lighthearted story. I want to go ahead and start talking about the missing submersible. And of course, I know things have constantly been updated, so there may be more information released by the time this podcast is released. So, according to the news, and it's going on a couple of days now, I believe, this submersible, to give you kind of a breakdown, it had left out, it's a tourist attraction, basically for basically high-end clients. I believe it's $250,000. 5 people are allowed to be on it. This particular voyage actually had one of the co-founders of this little attraction, so to speak. So Sunday night, it left out from Newfoundland, went out to define a submersible. For what I understand, this thing is not self-propelled. It basically sinks in a lack of a better word, basically it sinks, and hopefully they've lined it up perfectly so when it does get to the bottom, it's right above the Titanic, which, keep in mind, is basically 2.5 miles below sea level, or below the top of the sea level, ocean, whatever you want to call it. So anyway, we set out Sunday evening, and shortly after that, it got out to where it needed to be. It started to descend about an hour and 45 minutes into the descend down to the Titanic, which is typically a 2-hour descend, based on reports. They lost communication. Now, I find that interesting that they lost communication for many reasons. Short of they don't, as of now, since I'm doing this podcast, as of now, they don't have any reason of why the submersible went down. So obviously, if a crack formed and it flooded with water and this thing imploded on itself due to the 4,000 psi of pressure around it, which basically means 4,000 pounds of pressure every square inch. So basically, a small car is sitting on every square inch of this surface that's down there. So short of that, now, if they had any other malfunction and they just lost communication, I find it interesting that to have a car on the road, you have to have, certain safety features and things like this just to be on the road. But yet you can have basically a pill bottle that sinks to the bottom and then can come back up, and it's got 4 days of oxygen, and that's basically good enough. I found that interesting, and the guy that invented this thing or come up with the idea, he is a aerospace engineer slash pilot, I believe is the story. I believe his name is Mr. Rush. So I found that interesting that a man that focuses on airplanes and going into the sky is building things that go to the bottom of the ocean. That's a red flag to me. And another thing, if you're spending that kind of money, we're talking $250,000, which granted some of the people that were aboard this thing are worth $1 billion, so that's not, that's kind of chump change for them. But nonetheless, I found it interesting that something that cost, because he was on it himself, so we won't count that as revenue. So at $250,000 a piece, 5 people on there, that's $1.25 million. Obviously, $1 million of that is the revenue. The other $0.25 is the man himself. And you would think spending that kind of money on something, you would feel safe about what you're getting into. You get into an airplane, you don't really question anything. You see all the safety features. You see all this stuff. The FAA, all this stuff has been put in place to keep you safe. Same thing when you get in a car, everything is safe. But yet, for some reason, they're allowed to just put this pill bottle in the water. That's what I'm calling it, basically. Not saying it's a bad design, but it clearly was the cheaper version of submersibles. So if you got in a car and they said, yep, it's a great car, it's got these nice wheels, it's got all this stuff, and they're talking about all these features, but then they say, well, it doesn't have seat belts, turn signals now, we don't have anything like that, no lights, anything like that. More than likely, you're not going to get in it. But for some reason, an already risky venture going 2.5 miles below sea level, they increased the risk by having something that had no safety beacons, no type of navigation system, not necessarily to navigate through the water, but to even locate itself. And from the research I did, I've got the laptop set up. So from the research I've done, I've tried to look at all the photos. And don't get me wrong, 2.5 miles is a long way from the surface. So that being said, I know it may be difficult to have some type of tether, but you would think a non-powered unit that has to have a support ship to get it to where it's going would have some type of tether that connects it from it to the support ship. Again, as far as I understand, there's nothing in that as far as that go. No type of thing to connect it. And I was reading a report, and it said, and this just shows you how the media scrambles for stories. And to be honest with you, the media really pisses me off as far as mainstream, because all they're worried about is keeping you entertained and not giving you any real information. One of the I don't remember where I read it from, but they mentioned that there's a report that there's no way to get more oxygen to this unit. Well, I would hope not, because if there is, that means we can access it. Let's get it back up here. So it's just dumb comments like that surprise me that our media just kind of throws in there, and people are like, oh, well, we can get oxygen to it. That's a problem. Yeah, the other problem is we can't find this thing. And, I feel for the people that are on this thing. Granted, it is a risky venture they took. Not saying that doesn't mean their lives aren't valuable because they did something risky, like base jumpers. If a guy jumps off a roof with a parachute, it's dangerous. And if he dies, obviously, we feel bad about that. But in the end, it was a risky venture. It's not the same as, you're walking down the street and a car veers off and hits somebody. To me, that is a more tragic event. Even though all life is somewhat valuable, there's we can get off on that as far as the value of life. But someone veers off the road and hits a woman walking her child or children or a man, it doesn't matter who it is. We value that more because it's such a tragedy. Like, oh man, they were just walking. What are the odds? But here we are making this our top story in our country. And again, it's not a good thing, but we're spending lots of money on trying to find this vessel, which I'm fine with. We need to recover the bodies. I'm not saying that. But it was a risky venture, so everybody's talking about how tragic this is. This is just awful, as if it was a freak accident. I think we can all agree going 2.5 miles down into the ocean in a unpowered, I keep calling it a pill bottle. I mean, just something that drops into the water and then basically pops back up. And, reports are saying that this thing has, we'll just say 96 hours of oxygen or air supply for these people. I would imagine if this thing went down shortly after it was out there, and I assume the oxygen supply, these people don't get in until they are ready to lower. Even though it's on a support ship, I imagine they get into the capsule right as it's being lowered. I don't think they ride in this thing out there. So we'll say their oxygen supply starts as soon as they go into the water. They've got 96 hours. Now, if I'm sitting right here doing nothing, my heart rate's down, I'm using very little oxygen. My body's processing a small amount. Now, if I go running and I start breathing heavy, obviously I'm going to process more oxygen. So I can imagine and this is assuming this thing just didn't implode. Now, if it imploded, all this doesn't matter. They died instantly. I can't say they did, but I would only imagine that they died instantly. So that being said, if it was a fluke thing and it just sank and hit rock bottom, okay, I think it's safe to say that if they knew something went wrong, there's going to be panic. Of course, when panic sets in, heart rates elevate, we start breathing heavier, we're processing more oxygen. No, I did not design this thing, but I imagine if you have a set supply and you're not getting any more from any other source, you're going to go through that oxygen very fast. So, again, if some of this is wrong because of new reports, again, I don't know when this video, based on when I'm recording, when the reports have changed. But if this thing went down that fast, and it sank that fast, and they knew immediately they had issues, and it did not implode, I would imagine these people on board probably ran out of oxygen a lot quicker than 96 hours. Now, granted, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you how much oxygen you really process as your heart rate increases, but I imagine it's substantially more. And, that's sad, but as much as it's a tragedy that this has happened to 5 individuals, we'll just assume they're good people. What's tragic to me is I'm looking online right now, and this year, if I'm reading this correctly, this year there has been 4 accidental helicopter crashes in our military. This is not combat crashes. This is not because I know a lot of people have views on military like, well, we shouldn't be there fighting anyway, serves them right. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people that view that way about our own military, and that's sad because of those people we have our freedom. But that being said, there have been accidental crashes, and it looks to be 14 soldiers died and 3 had been injured. And that includes, I think, a rollover. One of them that killed actually a local guy to my home state. And not only that, we have soldiers that die all the time that, they're brought back over here. How much media attention do they get? Exactly. You probably didn't even know about most of those accidents. I'm not saying they don't report them, but I imagine it's breaking news. Apache goes down in a field. And that's about it. That's about all you're going to hear about it. And that's unfortunate that our news media is worried about what catches people's attention. The fact that we have – or look at your local news, okay? All the time, I'm sure, if you're like me in my area, all the time on local news you hear of people, whether it be a car wreck, a well, typically most time it's car wreck, but it's summertime, so a boating accident. Yes, they mention it on the news. And obviously it's not a search and rescue event. A lot of times they know where the body. So I know this story is a little different because there is a search and rescue, or at this point probably a recovery operation to find the bodies and what's left of the submersible. But it bothers me that we pick and choose what is more important. Okay, as far as I'm concerned, if assuming we're dealing with decent people, I feel like all the stories should be equal. Okay, so I've read comments on other videos where people are like, "Oh, it's disgusting how people say these people got what they deserve and stuff." And don't get me wrong, I don't believe that they got what they deserve. I don't think the people in this submersible were bad people. I don't think they deserve to die. Don't know them personally, but I don't believe that's the case. Unfortunately, a lot of people that make comments are probably middle-class people. And I'm making an assumption here, so don't hold me to it. Don't get mad at me. But if you do, whatever. They see, some billionaire dies in some tourist attraction that was risky anyway. Who cares? And the reason why a lot of people have this attitude is because they feel as if this class echelon of people do not care about them. They're in their own little world. And, I watch YouTube, and you see all these rich people, and it's just it's a me world to them. Not saying all of them are. You see a lot of them that do great things. But I don't think we should be harsh on some of the comments people have made. Again, it's very unfortunate what has happened. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's not. Do I think this should be our main headline? No, I do not. I think a lot of it's playing off because apparently the lady, the spouse of the gentleman that co-founded this tourist attraction, whatever you want to call it, apparently she had some family that was on the original Titanic that sank. So I think they're just trying to make this elaborate story, and they're tugging on people's heartstrings and trying to make a story. Yes, I think the people that passed away deserve somewhat of attention on here because it is unfortunate. But in the end, it was a risky venture. Okay, there's probably rock climbers that die all the time, but does anyone bat an eye at them because they were doing? No, they say, well, what serves them right? Idiots climbing up a mountain with no safety gear, free climbers. Okay, that's no different than going to the bottom of the ocean with no navigation, no tethering system, no propulsion system. It's the same thing, but for some reason we're making this a big issue. And if I had to base it off of what I've seen on reports, it has a lot to do because it's that perfect circle where a someone who is tied to the Titanic goes out here to the Titanic crash, they die there. To them it's just this great news story, and that's unfortunate. But again, what are we doing about our own military? What about people that are dying in our homeland all the time? You don't see this on the news. I'm not saying there's not sometimes some stories mentioned about it, but it's not. You know what I mean? That shows our priorities in this country, and it's screwed up. Don't get me wrong, but they're I think it's just another way to show that the media is mass media, for the most part, is a joke. I mean, I've even looked at some of the reports. It's like our media can't even agree. Like some reports you see, and it's not a big deal, but you'll see some reports say, "Oh, this vessel is 22 foot long." The other says it's 21 foot long. It's like, no, they can't even agree on that. Like they've got to have their own little edge to the story, and it's crazy. But yeah. So my point for all this story is, yes, it's tragic. Yes, I hate it happened, but in the end, they knew it was risky before they went. And not only is it a risky venture, I don't care if you were in a nuclear submarine with the military. You start going underwater in something, it's risky. But to get in something that is basically a prototype still, I would call that thing a prototype. I don't feel like they've done much to it to change it since they originally designed it. But it is unfortunate. But again, the fact that I'm looking at reports of accidental helicopter crashes. So forget combat. If you want to make that argument, well, they deserved it because they're out there fighting. Shame on you for thinking that, but we'll avoid that argument. These are accidental. These are training incidents. They have died, and I don't see any stories. I looked up stories, and I would find where they talked about it maybe one day. That was it. So just kind of my thoughts on it. That's what this podcast is for. I'm giving my opinion on it. I want your comments, feedback. Was I right? Am I wrong? What's your thoughts on it? That's what we're here for. We're here to communicate. But again, very sad incident. Hopefully we'll find out more through the investigation. Maybe by the time this podcast is out, we will know more. Hopefully, if the people on board are deceased, it did happen. Hopefully they can prove it happened instantly. They didn't suffer. They didn't suffocate, run out of oxygen. That's all we can hope for at this point. Do I believe that finding them and rescuing them is any chance now? No, I do not. I believe it is a rescue mission a recovery mission at this point. Yes, I do. So we'll keep them in our thoughts and prayers, but thanks again for watching, guys. This is the Stop and Listen podcast, and I'm your host, Alex, and I will catch you guys on the next one.